Hmm. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما يقربنا إليك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وعلمنا الحكمة. اللهم يسر ولا تعسر وتمم علينا بالخير. اللهم يسر ولا تعسر وتمم علينا بالخير. اللهم يسر ولا تعسر وتمم علينا بالخير. وبك نستعين يا فتاح يا فتاح يا فتاح. وبعد. So I'll just do like a short reading today, and then I think we'll be finishing pretty much the next session pretty much. There's not much left. So قال الإمام أبو الإخلاص يحيى بن زكريا النووي رحمه الله تعالى. يحيى بن شرف النووي رحمه الله تعالى، ونفعنا الله بعلومه وبركاته في الدارين آمين. اتفق العلماء على استحباب كتابة المصاحف أو المصحف، وتحسين كتابتها وتبيينها وإيضاحها وتحقيق الخط دون مشقه وتعليقه. قال العلماء. So he first says it's like everyone agrees that writing the mushaf in a beautiful way and to be, make it clear is recommended. And also to write the like to make do the calligraphy basically, do it properly. And they say to avoid mushk and ta'liq. So mushk means to write really fast and to have it's hard to read basically, light, too light or too fast. And the letters are all, jumbled together because they're writing really fast. So that should be avoided when writing the Quran. And then also they say ta'liq. Ta'liq is uh, basically when the letters in Arabic are supposed to be disconnected, like the waw doesn't connect to what comes after, the alif doesn't connect to what after comes after. So instead of making these letters disconnected, you make them connected, like because you're writing so fast. So that is also we shouldn't do when writing the Quran. ثم قال العلماء ويستحب نقد المصحف وشكله فإنه صيانة من اللحن فيه والتصحيف. وأما كراهة الشعبي والنخعي النقد فإنما كرهاه في ذلك الزمان خوفا من التغيير فيه، وقد أمن ذلك اليوم، ولا يمتنع من ذلك لكونه محدثا، فإنه من المحدثات الحسنة، فلم يمنع منه كنظائره من مثل تصنيف العلم، أو مثل تصنيف العلم you could say، مثل تصنيف العلم آه، وبناء المدارس والرباطات وغير ذلك والله أعلم. So then he just mentions that, it's recommended to have the dots on the letters because we know that, in older forms of Arabic writing, they didn't always put the dots. If you look at a lot of traditional Muslim sources, they say that there were no dots before the Quran was written, and then it was introduced in the time of Sayyidina Ali or the time a little bit after. That's what they say. But it seems like that's not actually completely accurate because we actually have samples of Arabic writing from before Islam even that do have dots. So it's not like it didn't exist at all. But definitely it was much less used in the past. And with the writing of the Quran, it became more widespread to actually write with the dots and put them on all the letters and have some more consistency and reliability in writing Arabic. And before Islam, Arabic was also written in that script, but it was not as widespread. Arabic was also written in like the Aramaic script. Arabic was also written in Greek script, actually. We have a lot of examples of Arabic written in Greek script because, the script is independent of the language, so it can be written in any script, really, just like we write Arabic now using Latin letters to transliterate things. So it was written in many different scripts, but this script became much more developed because of the Quran. So he says, that it's fine to have nuqt is the dots, and then shakal is the vowel. So it's true they didn't use vowels, which that was pretty much non-existent before. So that part is true. Um, But the ulama said it's fine because it protects from making errors. I think that's pretty obvious. But then the reason why he mentioned this is because we have from many of the Salaf, some of them he mentions here, but there's others also. There's some of the Salaf they said that well we shouldn't use dots or we shouldn't use vowels, etc. because that's not how we wrote it. That's not how the earlier generations of Sahaba wrote it down. Of course, the Sahaba did have some dots. It wasn't like no dots at all. And even the Musaf of Uthman had some dots from as far as we know. So he says that Ashabi and Akhai and others disliking the writing. That was only at that time, but that's not. There's no really fear of that today now. Like it's pretty clear what is the Quran and what is not. So he said it's a bid'ah hasana. It's an innovation. He called it al-muhdathat al-hasana, and just like having writing down ilm, because the early generations that also we find people saying disliking writing down ilm. They said it should only be transmitted from the mouth to the next person, like orally. But we see that that didn't really last. It's actually interesting. You see this same phenomenon among almost like any literate culture, even like the ancient Greeks and stuff. They didn't like that people started writing down notes and things like that. They used to say that, oh, now like anyone can access this. It's not like something only for people who have studied properly with teachers. So like even among the Salaf, you see that attitude as well. But yeah, that was very early. And then writing down, taking notes, writing hadith, this became normal pretty early on. Then he says, next section is فصل ولا لا تجوز كتابة القرآن بشيء نجس وتكره كتابته على الجدران عندنا وفيه مذهب عطائنا الذي قدمناه وقد قدمنا أنه إذا كتب على الأطعمة فلا بأس بأكلها وأنه إذا كتب على خشبة كره إحراقها. So some other rulings related to respecting the Musaf or respecting the Quran. So not permissible to write on something najis. And this is generally by ijma'. And they say it's from the action of like the people, magicians and things like that. So we don't do that. And makruh to write it down on the walls. So this is according to the Shafis and also according to Hanafis too, that it's generally makruh to write the Quran on the wall. But the reasoning they give here is because um, basically they said like there's fear of if there's fear of some disrespect or the fear of that wall, like a lot of times they're talking about temporary walls, so when that wall's like knocked down, it's not going to be it's going to be disrespected that writing. And about writing on the walls and masjids and having on the and like hanging it on the home now, pretty much everyone allows that now as long as it's respected. And that's not really the same as writing directly on a wall anyway. And also they say and he actually he mentioned it before somewhere. Um about writing on walls. Let me just check back what he said there. Yeah, they were talking about decorating the Quran with the walls before. So they're saying it's makruh and some of the Ata ibn Abi Rabah and others said no, it's fine if you do it in the Qibla of the masjid, like in the direction of the Qibla. Anyway, we'll keep going. And then he says they already talked about writing it on food. If it's already written on food, it's makruh to write it on the food, but if it does get written on the food, then it's fine to eat it now. It's not like you're not allowed to eat it anymore. But it shouldn't be written on food if possible. I mean, not if possible. Of course, it's not. It's possible to avoid, easily possible to avoid it. And then he said if it's written on wood, then it's makruh to burn it. And that we also talked about that before. I think he mentioned that before. So you'd have to kind of erase it first, and then you can use the wood to burn. ثم قال فصل أجمع المسلمون على وجوب صيانة المصحف واحترامه قال أصحابنا وغيرهم ولو ألقاه مسلم في القاذورة والعياذ بالله تعالى صار الملقي كافرا وقالوا ويحرم توسده بل توسد آحاد كتب العلم حرام. مم. ويستحب أن يقوم للمصحف إذا قدم به عليه لأن القيام مستحب للفضلاء من العلماء والأخيار فالمصحف أولى وقد قررت دلائل استحباب القيام في الجزء الذي جمعته فيه وروينا في مسند الدارمي بإسناد صحيح عن ابن أبي مليكة you could say وروينا or وروينا either way. Of course, Imam Nawawi, we would assume he has a direct sanad to Ad-Darimi, so Rawayna is fine too. Um, أن عكرمة ابن أبي جهل رضي الله عنه كان يدع المصحف على وجهه ويقول كتاب ربي كتاب ربي. So here we say that to respect the Mus'haf is, of course, an obligation. And here they say that, if someone places the Mus'haf in somewhere where like trash is thrown, some very disrespected place, then it's kufr. He becomes a kafir. So that's, of course, if it's done, with that intention of ihana, of disrespecting the Mus'haf, because to intentionally disrespect the Mus'haf is intentionally disrespecting the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And yeah, we have a lot of other similar rulings that the fuqaha mentioned. Putting the Mus'haf here is kufr. Doing this with the Mus'haf is kufr. And that's, of course, it all comes back to the meaning behind it, which is ihana to the Mus'haf, ihana to the Quran, like, lowering the status of the Quran and disrespecting it, dishonoring it. The next thing he talks about using Mus'haf as a pillow, just to like rest your head on. So they say here he says haram. In the Hanafis we say, yeah, this is makruh unless he's doing it to protect the Mus'haf. Like there's nowhere else to put it. So he's putting it under his pillow or under while he sleeps because, he's like traveling maybe and there's nowhere to put it that he can protect it. And they say, and he says it's haram even to do this with other books of knowledge, not just the Quran. So as far as I know in the Hanafi school, we wouldn't say haram here. But we would say, yeah, I mean, it's better to respect these books, but definitely not sinful to put it under your head or something like that. But it's definitely against the adab. I mean, forget about putting it under your head. The ulama generally wouldn't even put like a pen on top of the book, while it's on the side. They just put the pen there, put other things on top of the book. They wouldn't do that like, out of adab for ilm. But in terms of like hurma, we wouldn't say that in the Hanafis at least. And even the Shafis, I mean, of course, this has to be compared to what's in Shafi books. Like just because it's in this book doesn't necessarily mean it's like their relied upon position, despite Imam Nawawi's status in the madhab. Then he mentions this narration from Ad-Darimi. Oh, so also then he says, if someone gives you a mushaf, someone's giving you a mushaf, then it's a mustahab for you to stand up to receive it if you're sitting down, out of respect for it, because we already stand up for respect of people, so the Quran is even more, the mushaf is even more deserving of that respect. And as he mentioned before, Imam Nawawi wrote a whole risala about standing up for people out of respect. So he says he gave he gave some detail and evidence in that risala of his. So in the translation, it says someone is presented with a musaf. It just means anyone who's given a musaf. It's not like a specific thing. And then he mentions this narration about Ikrimah, the son of Abu Jahl, but the son of Abu Jahl, he became Muslim and he was a Sahabi. So he said whatever. So he would place the mushaf on his face and say Kitabu Rabbi, Kitabu Rabbi, out of this ta'zeem for this. There's another narration here where it says Kalamu Rabbi, Kalamu Rabbi. So maybe he said both things, like the speech of my Lord instead of the book of my Lord. ثم قال فصل وتحرم مسافرة بالمصحف إلى أرض العدو إذا خيف وقوعه في أيديهم آه، للحديث المشهور في الصحيحين أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم نهى أن يسافر بالقرآن إلى أرض العدو. So traveling with the Mus'haf to non-Muslim lands. He said hostile lands here. Ard al-Adu basically just means Dar al-Kufr. So what's not Dar al-Islam. But of course, it means Dar al-Kufr, which is not Dar al-Aman, like a place that the Muslims currently have a treaty with or something like that. So it means any other Dar al-Kufr, basically. So here it says haram to travel with the Mus'haf. And of course, there's a hadith about it. That's why we have this ruling. And the reason is we don't want it to be disrespected at all by or the non-Muslims being able to take possession of this mushaf. And here there's a hadith, and here he decides the hadith, that the well-known hadith from Sahihain, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam forbade this. Now, we're also living, technically in something that's not Dar al-Islam, in a place that's not Dar al-Islam. But remember, the meaning here is more about, is the Muslim going to be disrespected or not? That's the real consideration. And that's a big topic, but that's the situation we're in. Also, now that we have Masahif digitally, even if like you were going somewhere where that might happen, that you don't, there's no real need to bring a physical Musahif anyway. Okay, so the next one he says ويحرم بيع المصحف من الذمي وإن باعه ففي صحة البيع قولان للشافعي أصحهما لا يصح والثاني يصح ويؤمر في الحال بإزالة ملكه عنه. So can you sell a mushaf to a non-Muslim? So here it says it's haram to do so. Um, and the Hanafi, for the Hanafis, we would say not just the mushaf, even the translation, because the translation takes the same ruling. So that's what Sheikh Samar mentioned when we read this. Um, So he's saying it's haram to sell to a dhimmi. That means you're in Dar al-Islam and you're selling it to non-Muslim who's under the Muslim rule. Uh, so even then they're saying it's haram to sell to him. Now, what if he does sell to him? If he does sell to him, then there's two opinions within the Shafi'i madhab about is that a valid sale or not. So he says either it's invalid or it's valid. But if it is valid, then he's actually ordered to give up ownership. Like we sell to him, fine. It's now in his ownership. Now that non-Muslim is ordered to give up ownership of that and sell it again to a Muslim or gift it to a Muslim or some way that he'll no longer be the owner. And Sayyidi Uthman is saying same for the Maliki school, haram, including the books of Hadith, says during the trade is in. Oh, wow, say it's invalid. So for the Hanafis, it's valid. It's definitely valid, but yeah, it's makruh. Because the Hanafis we don't say haram unless it's something qat'i, so we would say makruh tahriman here. So this is for the dhimmi. So you can imagine that for the harbi, for a non-Muslim that's not under Muslim rule, the ruling would be even more severe. But I mean, like there's not much we can. I mean, that's assuming we have jurisdiction, right? And if we don't have jurisdiction, not much we can do about it. I think even for da'wah purposes, I mean, for some people, like, yeah, the Mushaf, like the Quran is how they come to Islam. That's fine. But for a lot of people, probably more beneficial for them would be like a general introduction to Islam and not necessarily the Mushaf al-Quran, because it's not, for many people, the Quran is not that easy to approach to just read cover to cover, which is how, most Westerners would just treat any book that, oh, we have to read it cover to cover, and they expect a certain structure, etc. But yeah, it depends. I mean, it differs from person to person. And then he says, ويمنع المجنون والصبي الذي لا يميز من حمل المصحف مخافة من انتهاك حرمته وهذا المنع واجب على الولي وغيره ممن يراه يتعرض لحمله. Sorry, it's like is the sound okay? It's like pouring outside the window. I have the window open.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. So yeah, then he says that the insane person as well as a child who's not of the age of tamyiz. Um, and he's gonna discuss this after like one page. The child who's mumayyiz. So the child who's not at the age of tamyiz. They sometimes say the muhaddithun used to say it's like 7 years old because of some hadith. But the fuqaha generally said it's just tamyiz can differ from child to child when they reach that age. It really, the meaning that we're looking for is that the child can be trusted with the mushaf to respect it. So, some children can and some can't. So here we're saying we don't give it to a child who can't be trusted to respect the mushaf because we fear that, it's going to be disrespected. And this is the responsibility of the whoever's responsible for that child, the wali. He has to stop that child from, if he's trying to go and carry it, then he shouldn't let him. So they do say, maybe he's gonna mention later, but they do say that, okay, I don't have wudu right now, so I see like my child is going to, I don't have the wudu right now, and then the mushaf is on the floor or it fell or something happened. Then I can tell my child to pick it up because he's not responsible to have wudu, so that's fine as long as I don't think he's going to disrespect it. And I think he'll mention that actually after like one page. ثم قال يعرف واحد وضوء for touching the مصحف قال فصل um, يحرم على المحدث. So he says yeah يحرم على المحدث مصح المصحف وحمله وسواء حمله بعلاقته بعلاقته sorry بكسر العين بعلاقته أو بغيرها سواء مس نفس المكتوب أو الحواشي نعم أو الحواشي like مس الحواشي أو الجلد ويحرم مس الخريطة والغلاف والصندوق إذا كان فيهن المصحف. هذا هو المذهب المختار. I think in your copy وهذا هو المذهب الصحيح المختار. وكذا لا تحرم هذه الثلاثة وهو ضعيف. نعم. ولو كتب في لوح فحكمه حكم المصحف سواء قل المكتوب أو كثر sorry. حتى لو كان بعد آية كتب للدراسة أو يكسر حتى لو كان بعد آية كتب للدراسة حرم مص اللوح. So just some rulings related to wudu and tahara, touching the mushaf. This is important because, you know, this is all the form of that had basically agree that generally you have to be in a state of tahara. If you don't have wudu, you should touch the mushaf. Now, of course, there's more detail there with the haid and stuff like that. But in general, this is agreed upon. And the Prophet ﷺ, you know, he wrote letters to Amr ibn Hazm and others with these instructions on them. And that's why Ibn Abd al-Barr and others said this is it's almost like something mutawatir. It's like ashbah bil mutawatir, these kind of instructions, because kind of the whole ummah has transmitted them. Even though, of course, we do find like these odd views here and there from some of the salaf otherwise, but generally the ummah has transmitted these rulings. Um, And you know, we see that like Salafiyya and others, they kind of popularize this view that like, oh, it's fine to touch without wudu, or at least some of them, not all of them, but like the certain strands from Salafiyya have popularized that view. But you know, as we can see, it's just like something that's basically agreed upon. And you know, Ibn Abdul Barr is saying it's like something with water, so it's very dangerous to go against that for them, for their own iman. It's dangerous. So he gives some related rulings here. I don't think we really need to read through all these about, you know, when it's in a bag, etc. Because it's pretty well known for. But yeah, basically, if it has in a Hanafi school, if it has a non-attached covering, then that non-attached covering, or it's not like permanently attached, that would be considered not part of the Mushaf, so it's fine to touch. So if the Quran is in, you know, one of those things they wrap around the Mushaf, that's fine. Like it's not attached to the Mushaf, just like wrapped around, or it's in a box or something, then we can touch that, and that's no problem, even without wudu. And he mentions a couple different views within the Shafi school here. And then he says if you write the Quran on like a board, then in the Shafi school, the whole board becomes like the Mus'haf. In the Hanafi school, we say that if the Quran is written on something, but it's not a Mus'haf, then technically you can touch the part that is not the actual writing. You can touch the rest of it. So we wouldn't necessarily say the whole board becomes like a Mus'haf. And they do sometimes give some rukhsa for people who are teachers of the Quran and these boards, even in Shafi school, I mean. Okay, so let's move on because this stuff is everyone has to learn it in their own school anyway. قال فصلا إذا تصفح المحدث أو الجنب أو الحائض أو راق المصحف بعود وشبهه ففي جوازه وجهان لأصحابنا أظهرهما جوازه وبه قطع العراقيون من أصحابنا لأنه غير ماس ولا حامل. نعم وهذا عليه الحنفية أيضا. والثاني تحريمه لأنه يعد حاملا للورقة والورقة كالجميع. وأما إذا لف كمه على يده وقلب الورقة فحرام بلا خلاف، يعني بلا خلاف عند الشافعية. وغلط بعض أصحابنا فحق فيها وجها والصواب القطع بالتحريم لأن القلب يقع باليد لا بالكم. So here, you know, can you touch the mushaf using like a pencil or a little piece of wood or something like that, that so you're not touching it directly. So here he's saying that in the Hashafi school it's fine, but they have another opinion that it's not okay. And in the Hanafi school we also say it's fine to do this. You know, you're not touching it directly, you're touching with like a pencil or something else. You're turning the pages that way, then that's fine. Next thing he mentions is wrapping one's sleeve over your hands. This is not allowed in the Shafi school with no disagreement. Also in the Hanafi school, this is not allowed because if it's your sleeve, that means that's the clothes that you're wearing, so it's part of you. So you're not allowed to touch the mushaf with it. If you take a separate sheet, a separate cloth, and wrap and like just put it around your hand and then pick up the mushaf with that, then that's fine, even without wudu. But here you can't just take your sleeve, something that you're wearing. It's considered to be, part of you at the time. So you can't just use that to pick up the mushaf. Now he talks about writing the mushaf. Do you need tahara or not? آه، ش- قال فصل إذا كتب المحدث أو الجنب مصحفا إن كان يحمل الورقة أو يمسها حال الكتابة فهو حرام، وإن لم يحملها ولم يمسها ففيه ثلاثة أوجه: الصحيح جوازه، والثاني تحريمه، والثالث يجوز للمحدث ويحرم على الجنب. So about writing the Mus'haf here, he says basically if someone who's not in a state of tahara, whether that's a major ritual impurity or minor ritual impurity, then if they're touching the page or they're touching the place where they're writing, they're touching the page while writing, then it's haram. But if they're not, they don't have to touch the pages at all, then there's three different opinions as you can see in the Shafi school here. In the Hanafis, we agree with number three. Actually, no, we don't. We don't agree with any of these. In the Hanafi school, we say that it's fine to write, regardless of which state of ritual purity you're in, as long as you don't touch the pages. Actually, there's some detail on that even in the Hanafi school. So I think we do have an opinion that's the same as number three over here, that it's for janaba, it's not allowed, but for uh, the minor ritual purity it is. But yeah, but the first two opinions, whether it's completely permissible or not, whether it's the first two are permissible and not permissible, those we don't have, because we can write without wudu if we don't touch the page. But yeah, I think there is another call that says that even if you don't touch the page, you can't write unless you write like one letter at a time or something. So it's not like you're writing the whole word at a time. So yeah, there's some detail for the Hanafi school, but I don't want to say it off the top of my head. And most people aren't writing Quran that often now, anyway, because since we have like so many printed copies. I think having so many printed copies is one reason why the Mus'haf is not as respected though as it used to be, since it's not something easy to get now and everyone has one. It's like a commodity now, while in the past it wasn't that way. So I think it kind of breeds disrespect, unfortunately. Okay. فصل. Let's just do this last chapter for now because it's kind of long, and then I think we can maybe meet this Saturday or something in person and do the khatam, because then we'll be done pretty much. After this one, there's like three short fossils, and then there's just a little dictionary type thing at the back, which we'll read through quickly, and then we'll be done. So it kind of says فصل. Uh, yeah, فصل إذا مس المحدث والجنب أو الحائض أو حمل كتابا من كتب الفقه أو غيره من العلوم وفيه آيات من القرآن أو ثوبا مطرزا من القرآن أو دراهم أو دنانير منكوشة به أو حمل متاعا في جملته مصحف أو لمس الجدار أو الحلوى أو الخبز المنكوش به، فالمذهب الصحيح جواز هذا كله لأنه ليس بمصحف وفيه وجه أنه حرام. So about touching books of ilm that have Quran written, or like a clothing that has Quran written on it, embroidered on it, or coins with Quran on them. They used to write sometimes verses of the Quran on the coins. And this was like in the late Umayyad and early Abbasid times and after that, which doesn't seem like a very good idea, but that's what they used to do because it makes handling the coins much more difficult. And then luggage with mushaf inside it, and then they also have like sweets and bread and things like that, which have Quran written on them. So they're saying that in the Shafi school, all this is allowed, but then there's another view that it's it's not allowed to touch these things. So I don't know what the difference is here. I was wondering in the Shafi school, what's the difference here between having it in your luggage and having it before? He said in the Shafi school, if it's in a box, then you're not allowed to touch it without wudu. But here it's in your luggage and you can touch it with wudu. Maybe it's less direct, or maybe it's because the box is like, it's actually meant for touching it's prepared specifically for carrying the mushaf. So that I guess you probably look in the Shafi books to see that detail. But I was wondering that because before they said in the Shafi school, It's not allowed to touch the box in which there is a mushaf. And here it's in the luggage you can, or it's in his things in general. So yeah, they probably have some tafsir on that. ثم قال وقال أقطع القضاة أبو الحسن الماوردي في كتابه الحاوي. I think we saw him before. أقطع القضاة, I mentioned him before. يجوز مسح الثياب المطرزة بالقرآن ولا يجوز لبسها بلا خلاف لأن المقصود بلبسها التبرك بالقرآن، وهذا الذي قاله ضعيف ولم يوافقه أحد عليه فيما رأيته. بل صرح الشيخ أبو محمد الجويني، هذا والد إمام الحرمين، وغيره بجواز لبسها، وهذا هو الصواب والله أعلم. Okay, so this is just like an internal Shafi debate that one of these Shafi ulama who we mentioned here said that it's fine to touch clothes that have Quran embroidered on them even without wudu, but you can't wear them because but it's not permissible to wear them because what is intended by wearing them is tabarruk bil Quran. But then Imam An-Nawawi saying that's weak. Nobody agreed, and Al-Juwayni and others said that it's fine to wear it too, and this is the correct opinion. I think that yeah, there may be some tradition for like of wearing clothes with embroidered with the Quran for like certain ceremonies and things in some cultures. So basically, so that's fine. They're saying here. Now, what about tafsir, books of tafsir? وأما كتب وأما كتب تفسير القرآن فإن كان القرآن فيها أكثر من غيره حرم مسها وحملها، وإن كان غيره أكثر كما هو الغالب ففيه ثلاثة أوجه: أصحها لا يحرم، والثاني يحرم، والثالث إن كان القرآن بخط مميز بغلظ أو حمرة ونحوهما حرم، وإن لم يتميز لم يحرم. قلت This part is in my copy. I don't think it's in yours, but قلت ويحرم المس إذا استويا. قال صاحب التتمة من أصحابنا إذا قلنا لا يحرم فهو مكروه. Okay, so now tafsir. So in the Shafi school, if the amount of Quran is more than the commentary itself, then that's kind of rare because most commentaries would at least give you more than what's in the Quran itself, like just the wording of the Quran. So this would basically just be like, I think that Sheikh Muhammad Ali As-Sabuni, rahimahullah, he has like this Quran. It's a mushaf, and then in the margins they just give you the meanings of certain words. Uh, that's it. So that would be like something like this. That's what this rule would apply to. It's mostly Quran. There's just a little bit non-Quran in there. So in there, they would still be haram to touch it or carry it without wudu. And in the Hanafi school, we would agree because that's still like a mushaf basically. But he's saying, what if the tafsir is more? And that's what we expect for most of us here. They actually say for Tafsir al-Jalalain, the Jalalain, they actually counted it. One of these Shafis, there's someone who actually counted it. And it counted the number of, I think, letters or words in Jalalain and compared it to the number of letters or words in the Quran. And they actually came up with that, okay, the Jalalain actually has more than the Quran, more non-Quran than Quran. Therefore, Tafsir al-Jalalain is fine to fetch without wudu. That's assuming that it only has Quran plus Jalalain. Most copies of Jalalain today are not like that. They have the Quran printed, and then they have the tafsir with the Quran printed again. So that means there's twice as like the Quran is basically printed in there twice. So you have to take that into account. So that would actually be majority Quran, and it would still require wudu. This is according to the Shafi'is and the Hanafis too. So here he gives three opinions for what if the tafsir is more than the Quran. Uh, so he says the mu'tamad for them, as far as I know, is that it's not haram. And then the second opinion, which is the same as the Hanafi opinion, is that it'll still be haram to touch. No, sorry. Well, that's what I have written here, but we have some tafsir also in the Hanafis because he's saying if, actually, so the Hanafis, they have their own khilaf about is it like forget about whether the Quran is more or not. Is tafsir, do we require wudu to touch it in general? So actually, the mu'tamad seems to be it's wajib actually, not fard, but wajib to have wudu even when touching tafsir. So if you take that opinion, then definitely it doesn't matter how much Quran is in there. It would be you have to have wudu. But if you take the other position, which is that's not wajib, then we would look at okay, is it more Quran or less Quran than tafsir? So yeah, so you can say the second opinion is the same as the Hanafis if we go with wujub. Even though we wouldn't say haram, we would say makruh, but still similar to what they would say. And the third opinion is depending on whether or not the Quran is written with a different script than the tafsir, which most modern editions would be like that. Okay, he quotes a little bit more detail about that, about the Shafi school. Let's just keep going to books of hadith. وأما كتب الحديث وأما كتب حديث رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فإن لم يكن فيها آيات من القرآن لم يحرم مسها والأولى أن لا يمسها إلا على طهارة وإن كان فيها آيات لم يحرم على المذهب بل يكره وفيه وجه أنه يحرم وهو الوجه الذي في كتب الفقه. So, touching books of hadith, he says if there's no ayat of the Quran in there, so some books of hadith won't have any. If you're talking about any major collection of hadith, then they will have ayat of Quran in them because there's a whole most books have kitab al-tafsir, right? Tafsir of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for by verses of the Quran, and of course, just in general, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would sometimes mention ayat of Quran, which would then be mentioned in the hadith, right? So most like major books of hadith will have ayat in them. If you're talking about like small specific collections, then maybe you'll be able to find some that don't have any ayat mentioned in them. Although these days, if you talk about modern editions, a lot of times, even if ayat aren't mentioned in the hadith, they may be mentioned in footnotes or things like that. So anyway, if it doesn't have any ayat, he's saying that it's fine to touch, and we would agree. We would agree on the Hanafi school. It's meaning it's not sinful or anything, but of course, out of adab, better to have wudu when touching these books, any books of ilm, or any books at all, or even blank pieces of paper. It's that's part of the adab of ilm, or even like pens. Better to have wudu, and that just reinforces the whole general recommendation of having always being in a state of wudu. لا يحافظ على wudu إلا مؤمن, as the Prophet ﷺ said. And they actually have stories from like Ibn Taymiyyah and some of the people that on their deathbed they said لا أكفر يعني أحدا يتودع أو يداوم على wudu. Like I don't make takfir of anyone who stays constant on their wudu. And the reason that they say that is because of this hadith that whoever stays constant on wudu, لا يحافظ على wudu إلا مؤمن, then he's definitely a mu'min. So it's interesting that some of these people who were known for like takfir and things like that, in their deathbed, they kind of said that anyone who stays in a state of wudu, then I don't make takfir of them. Anyway, he says, he mentions these opinions here. What if it does have ayat? Even then, it's not haram, but they have another opinion but they say it's makruh in the Shafi'i school. One interesting here says, هو الوجه الذي في كتب الفقه. So this is the one, the opinion that's mentioned in the Kutub al-Fiqh, but he's not taking that one. So it's interesting in the Shafi school, like how important an-Nawawi is. So we'll just read this last line and then we'll start from this next part on Saturday, inshallah. وأما المنسوخ تلاوته كالشيخ والشيخة إذا زنيا فرجموهما أو غير ذلك فلا يحرم مسه ولا حمله قال أصحابنا وكذلك التوراة والإنجيل. So what about something that's abrogated? It was part of the Quran, but we no longer recite it. So the most famous example is this one. الشيخ والشيخة إذا زنيا فرجموهما البتة نكالا من الله تعالى. The rest of it is in the hadith. It's in the Sahihain. Um, so this is about stoning the adulterer, right? This is of course not every adult. This is not everyone who does zina. This is specifically adultery, meaning they're muhsan. Muhsan means basically they had legitimate sexual access at some point. It doesn't mean they have to be married right now. That's a lot of times people translate it as married because adultery in English we usually use it for people who are married. Like it's not about someone who's like, okay, now they're a widow and they commit zina. We don't really use that in English, but for in Arabic they would still, I mean in fiqh they would still be considered muhsan, so they would be stoned and not lashed. Um, so there's no good translation to be honest, direct translation. But anyway, this is the famous. It's in the Sahihain, right? But then the problem is, a lot of them still don't think this is the actual wording. They say maybe this is riwayah of the ma'na. This is someone transmitted this in terms of meaning, but the actual wording of the Quran was not this because they say first of all it's not mutawatir, so they don't have to accept that it was ever the Quran. It's abrogated. Also, they say the balagha, the balagha of this statement here doesn't match the balagha of the Quran for various reasons. Um, anyway, I guess regardless of whether this is the actual wording or not, he's saying you don't need wudu for this. It's not haram to touch it or to carry like this kind of wording that's mansukh tilawatan. And remember, we have things that are abrogated in terms of tilawa. We don't recite it anymore, but the hukam is not abrogated. The ruling is not abrogated. And this is one example because stoning the adulterer is still established. It's just that we don't recite it in the Quran anymore. It wouldn't count if you did it in your prayer, for example. And the according to the Shafis, as he says here, even the Torah and the Injil, the Torah, the Bible, for example, don't need wudu to touch them. But the Hanafis, the Hanafis disagree. We say you need wudu to touch even these other books, Torah and the Injil, even in our time. I mean, we still need wudu to touch them. And as far as I know, the Hanafis are the only ones to say that out of the madhahib, but I'm not sure. But I think so. And we would of course apply this to translations of anything, right? Translation of the Bible, translation of Torah, translation of the Quran in the Hanafi school. So it's the interesting the reasoning they give is that they don't need wudu for that is because these books have tahrif and they've been changed, etc. But we would say that there's still parts of it that are likely, original. So we still don't allow it generally. But I think there's some detail here that we'd have to look at because some of those gospels are definitely not revelation, nor do they even claim to be revelation, right? They're literally just somebody writing down the history of a certain period of time during the time of Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam or right after, and they don't even claim to be the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I'm wondering if these, would the Hanafis differ? But it seems like in the Hanafi books, what they say is just general, like okay, Injil and Torah. But then what did they consider Injil then versus what we have now? Even like the Catholics, for example, now and Orthodox Christians have a different canon than Protestants. So I think there's some detail that needs to be looked into there. Like someone could probably write a risala on that. But yeah, in general now, if someone needs to touch a Bible or a Torah, then you should have wudu in the Hanafi school. And that one interesting detail I just noticed here that Imam Nawawi mentions that from Al-Mutawalli, I don't know who that is, but he says probably some Shafi scholar. He says that if the person thinks that there's something that's not changed, then it's actually makruh to touch it without wudu, but it's not haram. So I guess I still have some inclination here towards if it may be something original, then better to have wudu to touch it. So I think that's what we'll stop here today. Then maybe on Saturday we'll meet like in the noon or afternoon. I'll post on the group and I'll ask say Isman and whoever else wants to come, and we'll have like a small khatam for the book because I think there's not much left. And so it's basically just these four sections, and then the rest is just like words that we'll read through. I just want to read the whole thing because just for completion's sake. So inshallah we'll start from here on Saturday. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. جزاك الله خير.
أجزانا وإياكم